Welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up our guess the number game, and we're going to set up the UI of the game. And then in the next video, we're going to start writing our first code for it. So let's go ahead and create a new project. I'm going to use 3D here, and I'm going to call this one guess the number. So the goal that we have for this video is to set up the game that it looks something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like that, but overall that's more or less the goal. So let's go ahead and set that up. Therefore, what we will first of all do is we will save our scene with a different name. So let's change the name of our scene, and I'm going to call this one game scene instead. So let's reload the scene because we already have it open. The sample scene is currently open. So let's rename it, and you see now the name has changed here at the top as well. So what we are going to require are 3 UI elements. It's going to be the text, a button, as well as an input field. Okay, so let's get started. First, let's set up the text, and let's go over to the scene view and look at our text. Therefore, we can move a little bit around. So let's change it like so. And we can see, okay, this is where our text will be positioned inside of our UI, like so. So the text can just say new text. It doesn't have to say anything in particular at this point. We will change, however, the font size. So let's go over here on the right-hand side and change the font size of our text to something like 48 pixels. Okay, so it's going to be quite big, and you already see that even the new text is not visible anymore. So here you see it's not visible in game mode. In order to make it visible, what you can do is you can either change the size of the text here at the top, or you can make sure that it overflows. So horizontal overflow, let's set that to overflow. And the vertical overflow, let's set that to overflow as well. So now our text will overflow, so to speak. So even if it doesn't have enough space inside of its container, so here the container is 160 times 30, it will still be visible and displayed. Now let's change something with our game window here. So by default, you can see it sets to free aspect. And I'm going to deactivate this low resolution aspect ratios, and then it will automatically adjust it so that our screen will automatically scale based on what we set up here. So it's basically scaled in here. And then if I change here, you can see if I change the screen size, it will follow the new aspect that we have set up. What I want to do, however, is going to be a full HD setting. So let's set that up to full HD here. Let's deactivate low resolution aspect ratios, and then we should get the screen how it should look like. So the text of 48 seems to be fine. Of course, you can play around with the values, so maybe you want it to be even bigger. So here you are free to use whatever size you want to use. Okay, now that's our text, and we can of course also change the color. So we can select a very bright green color, so to speak, and that should look a little better, even though it doesn't look good with the horizon in the background. So how can we change that? Well, you can go over to your main camera, and here under the camera component, you will find the clear flags, and it says skybox. And here you can select solid color, for example, and suddenly the background has a solid color. And I wanted to use a grayish color, a dark gray, something like this. Here you can play around with the values, select the gray that you like, and then this green will pop out a lot better and will look a lot better as well. Now there's something else about the text. Let's go back to the text. The text now is not really centered. And that is because if we look at the paragraph alignment here, you can see that it's aligned towards the left and towards the top. So in order to change that, we can align it towards the center in both directions. So inside of its container, which is this 160 width and 30 height, it will now be centered. You can see it a little better from here that now it's going to be centered inside of this white box that we have here. Of course, you can change the box size as well, width of 300 maybe, and the height of 50, for example, then it will be inside of the box. But because we overflow, it doesn't really matter too much. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a button. And this button is now exactly on top of our text. I want the button to be in fact in the middle, and underneath I want to have the text. So first of all, the button should have a different text. So underneath the button, you can see that there is this text property, and I will change that text to guess. I'm going to change the font size as well to 48. Therefore, of course, I need to make sure that my button is going to be a little bigger. So let's change the width to something like 200 and the height to something like 50 as well. Then we will see that our text is still not there. So how can we fix that? Well, you can go over to your text and play around with the font size. You can play around with the overflow. You can check out if with overflow it works, and you will see this is how big it would be. Or maybe you can also just change the font size up a little bit. So something like 36 may be a little better. You can go back to the default values using wrap and truncate, even though here it doesn't really matter too much because, well, we don't have much text that we are displaying in here. So this overflow basically just allows us to overflow off the boundaries. Truncate will basically cut it off at a certain point, and wrap will try to wrap the text and push the extra text into the next line. So if I had a very long text here, you can see if I wrap, it will be limited here. If I overflow now, it will overflow in the horizontal direction. And then if I overflow on the vertical direction, you can see then it will overflow vertically and all of the text will still be displayed. So that is something that you can play around with. I'm just going to have the guess text like so. Now, of course, because our button is in the way of the text, let's change the position of the text up a little bit. So you can see it's in the center. So the anchor presets are middle and center. And I'm going to change the Y position. I'm going to put it further down like so. So I'm going to use something like -100. Okay, so let's look at our game. You can see it's at -100. It looks quite okay. Actually, we can also see that maybe our button is too small now. So maybe we should play around with that. That's really something that you can test and find the right size for you. Okay, so the button maybe all 300 would be better. So 300 width and 80 height. Maybe that's a little better. Then the text should be bigger and so forth. So it really is up to you how you want it to be. Okay, and then we need to have an input field. So here UI and then select input field. And now let's change the position of that input field to 100 for the Y position. So it will now be on top of our guess button. Let's also change the size here to 300 times 80. So it will be the size of our button. But now you see that the text that our input field has to offer, this enter text ... which is going to be a placeholder, this one here, is rather small. So let's change the font size of that as well to something like 48. And then the text of the input field, let's change that to 48 also. So whatever we enter now will also have a font size of 48. Now, if you look at this text field and you scroll a little bit down, all right, and now inside of our input field, so click on the input field, there you see that there are a bunch of other settings also, like the image that you have as a background. So if you wanted, you could add a background here. Then the fact that your input field has a certain color, so you can change the input field's color as well. So also the background color. So either you assign an image or the actual input field color. You can play around with that. Once you hover over it, once you highlight it, how should it change the color? So for example, highlighted color, if I change that to this green color, for example, and now I run it, and now let's highlight it by hovering over it. You see now it's highlighted and it has this highlighted color. Okay, so that's something you can play around with. Then what should be the disabled color? So once we deactivate our input field, or the selected color and so forth. So you can really play around with those values here. But the thing that I actually wanted to talk to you about is going to be the content type. Because I want to make sure that we cannot enter whatever we want in there. Because if we run our game now, we can see that we can enter letters, we can enter numbers, all the good stuff. Okay, so let's change that. What we want to change it to is going to be an integer number. So here the content type should be integer number. So integer numbers are whole numbers. So now this text input field will only be, input field will only accept whole numbers. So let's run this real quick. And now let's try to enter Dennis. You can see, well, it doesn't accept anything, but numbers are accepted, as well as the comma and the dot are not accepted either. So basically only whole numbers are accepted, and that's exactly what we want. And I'd say that's it for this video. So now we have set up our UI so that we can actually play around with it in the next video and add a little bit of code to our game. But for now, our UI is ready. So you saw a couple of things. First of all, how to use an input field and how to define what kind of data you can enter in there. You saw how you can change the clear flags to solid color in order to get this background, which is a solid color, instead of using the skybox, which is also very nice, but not for our game in particular. And then you saw a bit of settings for your graphical user interface as well. All right, so that's it for this video. Make sure to save your scene as always when you're done with your changes, and see you in the next video.